The moment I found the guardianship papers on my kitchen table, I knew my daughter wanted me gone while I was still alive. 68 years on this earth, 3 decades of hard work as an accountant, and the house my late wife and I built a life in, all reduced to an asset on a petition. It was a Tuesday night in late October, Cleveland. Cold air slipped in through the cracked kitchen window, rattling the blinds. The manila folder sat there under the yellow light, waiting for me like a snake coiled on the counter. I slid it open with the edge of my thumb, and there it was, guardianship petition. Her name typed neatly in the box marked petitioner. My name typed under proposed ward. In black and white, I was branded incompetent, unable to manage finances, a risk to myself. The words were knives. Before I continue, before I tell you how I fought back, this is Senior's Revenge Tales. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to that night. I remember lowering myself into the wooden kitchen chair, its legs groaning under me, the seat cold as stone. My glasses slid down my nose as I traced the lines on the page. Each paragraph felt like another betrayal. She wanted control of my money, my health decisions, and most of all, my home. That home wasn't just drywall and shingles. It was my retirement, my anchor. My wife and I had scrimped and saved through winters where the furnace rattled and summers where we opened every window to cut costs. Every receipt was our pension. Every tax bill was proof we'd survived another year. On the counter sat the crumpled roof repair bill from the week before, $2,800 for patching leaks above the den, paid in full by me. Proof that I wasn't slipping. Proof that I was still capable. And yet she'd tossed it aside like trash. Evidence didn't matter to her. What mattered was the equity, over $300,000 in value, more if she rushed to sell. I tried to breathe, but the room pressed down on me. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. The wall clock ticked in steady beats, like a countdown to my erasure. I stood and wandered through the house, paper in hand. The rocking chair by the window where my wife had nursed our daughter. The quilt folded neatly on the sofa, sewn by my mother's hands. The brass keys hanging by the door, polished smooth from decades of turning locks. She saw assets. I saw memories. When betrayal comes from strangers, you expect it. When it comes from your only child, it guts you. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the dining table with a mug of bitter coffee. The papers spread before me. On the second page, my daughter Sep's handwriting scrawled in blue ink, "Expedite before Dad changes mind." Expedite. Like I was a transaction, not a man. By dawn I was shaky, but not defeated. I pulled open the metal filing cabinet in the corner of my study. Out came tax returns from the last 5 years, each stamped and signed. Pharmacy slips with my signature, proving I picked up my own prescriptions. The roof bill, folded crisp. The notarized deed to the house, still in my name. I stacked them in front of me like ammunition. At 9 a.m., my hands trembling, I picked up the phone. When she answered, her tone was casual, like she wasn't orchestrating a coup. "Care to explain the folder you left on my counter?" I asked. Silence. Then a sigh. "Dad, you weren't supposed to see that yet." "Yet?" I snapped. "It says I sit them incompetent. You want a judge to take my rights." Her voice was soft, but cold. "It sits for your own good. You sit your old. You sit your tired. You can sit your keep up with the bills. This way you sit your be safe. And the house one sit your fall apart." My grip on the receiver tightened until my knuckles ached. "That house is my life. It sits, not yours to take." She didn't argue. She didn't even apologize. She just said, "We'll talk later," and hung up. The line went dead, but the fire in me roared to life. That morning, betrayal turned into resolve. Because when your own child writes you off as incompetent, you've got two choices: lie down and let them bury you, or stand up and prove you're not done yet. I slid the guardianship papers back into the folder, wrapped them in a rubber band, and locked them in my desk drawer. Not as evidence against me, but as evidence against her. As I closed the drawer, the house creaked in the cold wind. And I whispered to myself, "She thinks Sep's already won. She has no idea what Sep's coming." The morning after I found those papers, I barely recognized myself in the bathroom mirror. My skin looked sallow under the flickering light. I splashed cold water over my face, but the heaviness didn't wash away. For 2 days straight, I hardly ate. The kitchen table stayed cluttered with proof of my so-called incompetence. The guardianship petition, my neat stack of receipts, and a coffee mug stained dark from reheated dregs. I kept circling back to one thought: how could she? How could my daughter, the child I raised alone after my wife passed, turn around and treat me like a burden she needed to offload? It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. On October 31st, my neighbor Jim knocked on my door. Vietnam vet, steady as they come. He squinted at me and said, "You look like hell, Frank. You eating it all?" I forced a laugh. I said I'm fine. Just busy. But I wasn't fine. I hadn't shaved in 3 days. My bills sat unopened in a pile by the door. Property taxes. $4,600 due November 15th, mocked me from the envelope. I'd always prided myself on never missing a payment. Not once in 40 years. Now I couldn't even bring myself to open the damn letter. That night I found myself listening to old voicemails. Her voice filled the room, casual but cutting. "Dad, you said'll thank me when you said her comfortable in assisted living." Comfortable. As if stripping me of independence was a gift. I pressed the phone to my ear until it beeped. The silence afterward was worse. I thought about my wife. She'd passed 10 years earlier, breast cancer. I remembered her last words in the hospital: "Promise me you'll stay strong for her. She'll need you." Back then, I thought she meant emotionally. I never imagined need would turn into greed. I shuffled to the den, where boxes of photo albums lined the shelves. Halloween pictures from when our daughter was a girl dressed as a witch, clutching a plastic pumpkin full of candy. I remembered holding her hand, telling her ghosts weren't real. But now, the ghost was my own child, haunting me while I was still alive. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal. It was the whisper that maybe she was right. Maybe I was slowing down. Maybe I was becoming the burden she painted me as. The doubt gnawed at me in the quiet hours. On November 2nd, I skipped church. First time in 20 years, I couldn't face the congregation, couldn't stomach the thought of small talk about hymns and weather when my own daughter was plotting to erase me. I stayed home, sat in the recliner with a blanket, and let the house feel like a cage. But grief has a strange rhythm. It breaks you down before it steals you. On November 3rd, I walked past the kitchen counter and saw the roof repair bill again. $2,800, stamped paid. I'd written that check with my own hand. Proof of competence stared me in the face. And in that moment, something shifted. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't incapable. She was lying. Still, the emotional collapse lingered. I didn't just lose trust in her. I lost trust in myself. Every little slip felt monumental. Forgetting where I set my keys. Burning a piece of toast. Misplacing a water bill. I found myself whispering, "Maybe she sets right. Maybe I can keep up." But then the memories returned. My wife, laughing in this same kitchen as we sealed envelopes for the mortgage. The years of balancing ledgers for clients. Making sure every cent matched. Numbers had always been my truth. And the numbers still added up. On November 4th, Jim knocked again. He handed me a bowl of chili his wife had made. "You skipping meals again?" he asked. I wanted to lie, but my voice cracked. "She's trying to take the house, Jim." He frowned. "Your daughter?" I nodded. Tears burned hot at the corners of my eyes. It was the first time I said it out loud, and hearing it made it real. Jim put a hand on my shoulder. "Dawn let her. You still got fight in you." I nodded, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind rattle the gutters. My daughter wanted me declared unfit. She wanted a judge to rubber stamp my extinction. But inside that collapse, inside the shame and doubt, a tiny ember burned. Because if I was really so broken, would I still be lying awake, planning, thinking, remembering every detail? The papers said I was incompetent. But the man who signed that $2,800 check, the man who stacked receipts like ammunition, wasn't done yet. The collapse had humbled me, stripped me down to my bones. But bones don't break easy, they carry weight. And in the silence of that long November night, I realized something: grief would not be the end of me. It would be the beginning. By November 5th, I knew collapse wasn't an option anymore. My daughter had made her move. If I didn't answer it with something stronger, I'd be boxed in before Thanksgiving. I started with what I knew best: paper. As an accountant, I'd built a career on documents. Proof, signatures, ledgers that no one could dispute. So I pulled every record I had and spread them across the dining room table. It looked like a war room. Tax returns, bank slips, pharmacy receipts, the notarized deed to the house. Each sheet was a bullet in the chamber. But bullets don't win wars without strategy. That morning I walked into a downtown law office on Euclid Avenue. The brass plate on the door read Marissa Carter, attorney at law. I'd met her once at a church fundraiser. Young, sharp, with a reputation for not backing down. I slid a check across her desk, $1,200 as a retainer. My hands shook as I wrote it, not from weakness, but from the gravity of the step. She leaned forward. So your daughter filed for guardianship? I nodded, passing the manila folder across the desk. She flipped through it quickly, then raised an eyebrow. You live alone, you pay your bills, you drive yourself to appointments. On what grounds is she claiming incompetence? Greed, I said flatly. She smiled thinly. That SIP's not a legal basis, that SIP's a weakness on her part. Her paralegal, a kid named Alex, fresh out of law school, took notes. He pointed at one line in the petition. She claims you missed prescriptions last month. Is that true? I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the slip from the pharmacy. October 31st, refill picked up at 3:42 p.m., my signature in blue ink across the bottom. Does that look like neglect to you? Alex grinned. Looks like a defense. For the first time in days, I felt my spine straighten. That afternoon, I began a new routine. Every move, every receipt, every small detail, I documented. November 6th, $42.19 at the grocery store. November 7th, $28 gas fill-up. I slipped each slip into a folder labeled Independence. If she wanted to portray me as incapable, I'd drown her in proof of the opposite. But secret planning isn't just about defense. It's about offense. On November 8th, I started a diary. Not of feelings, but of facts. Every time she called, I wrote down the time and what she said. When she showed up unannounced, I noted the date, the hour, even the weather. I wrote in a leather-bound notebook my wife had given me years ago, its pages now weaponized for survival. And then came the foreshadow that sealed my resolve. That weekend, during Sunday dinner at my sister-in-law Seps's, I overheard my daughter talking to her cousin in the kitchen. She didn't Seps know I was nearby. Through the thin wall, her words carried, "Dad won Seps's last another winter. The judge will see that." My fork froze midair. It wasn't concern. It wasn't love. It was calculation. She was counting down the seasons of my life like they were lines on a balance sheet. I slipped out quietly, sat in my car, and let the November cold seep in. The betrayal was no longer theory. It was spoken out loud. That night, I added a new piece of evidence to the folder, my memory of that overheard sentence, written down word for word with the date. November 9. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a seed. And seeds grow when watered. Meanwhile, I called my neighbor Jim. "Can you keep an eye out?" I asked. "If she shows up when I said I'm not home, just note it down." Jim chuckled. "You planning a trial?" "Something like that," I said. Because I was. By November 10th, my house felt less like a cage and more like headquarters. The kitchen table stayed cluttered, but not with despair. With strategy, documents stacked neatly, labeled. Keys hung by the door, and I checked them twice a day. I even oiled the locks again, making sure no one could slip in unnoticed. Still, secrecy mattered. My daughter had no idea I'd retained counsel. No idea I was building a paper fortress around myself. To her, I was still the old man she thought she could steamroll. And that illusion was my advantage. On November 11th, Marissa called. The hearing date is set, December 18. I scribbled it in red ink on the wall calendar above the fridge, December 18th. Just 1 week before Christmas. She wanted me stripped before the holiday so she could wrap my house like a gift to herself. Not if I wrapped her lies first. I closed that night by flipping through my wife's old Bible. A bookmark still sat in Psalm 27. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. I wasn't a saint, but those words steadied me. Because if my own daughter could forsake me, then fighting back wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Secret planning isn't glamorous. It's lonely, quiet, and full of doubt. But by the second week of November, the collapse was over. The confessional had turned into a ledger. Every receipt, every overheard whisper, every date circled on the calendar, It was all leading somewhere. And as I slid the November 9th entry into the folder, I whispered to myself, "You want winter to bury me? Fine. But first you still have to face the fire." By November 12th, grief was behind me. Now it was about precision. If my daughter wanted to build a case against me, I'd give her nothing but locked doors and paper trails she couldn't breach. The first thing I noticed was the missing key. I'd kept a spare on a hook near the pantry, tucked behind a coffee tin. One morning it was gone. I tore through drawers, checked pockets, even sifted through the laundry. Nothing. That's when the chill set in. She had been in my house when I wasn't there. On November 13th, I called a locksmith. $189 to change every lock on the house. I stood by the doorframe as the man drilled out the old cylinders, brass shavings falling like sparks. He handed me 3 new keys, and I slid one into my pocket like it was a weapon. "She can just walk in anymore," I muttered. That same day, I visited my friend Mark, a realtor from church. We met at a quiet diner off Euclid Avenue, over eggs and burnt coffee. I leaned in and said, "Mark, I need you to list my house." Quietly. His fork paused midair. "Frank? Are you sure?" "More sure than I've ever been. She's trying to take it. If I sell before she gets her claws in, she has nothing." Mark nodded slowly. "I handle it." Discreetly. On November 14th, Mark walked through the house with his camera. We kept the blinds drawn so the neighbors wouldn't gossip. He clicked photos of the den, the living room with its old quilt, even the rocking chair by the window. Every shutter snap felt like another step toward freedom. I signed the preliminary listing papers at my kitchen table, pen scratching under the dim light. I folded the copies and slipped them inside an old hymnal my wife used to keep. If my daughter snooped again, she'd never think to look between "Amazing Grace" and "How Great Thou Art." That evening, I stood outside in the cold November air, staring at the front lawn. For 30 years, this house had been my fortress. Selling it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. If she wanted to liquidate me, I'd liquidate first, on my own terms. But revenge requires patience. On November 15th, the property tax bill came due, $4,600. I drove downtown, walked up the courthouse steps, and paid in person with a cashier's check. The clerk stamped "PA'd" in red across the slip. I tucked it into my folder marked Independence. If she tried to claim I was neglecting my obligations, the ink said otherwise. 2 days later, November 17th, I sat down with Marissa and Alex again. They reviewed the listing paperwork and the paid tax receipt. Alex grinned. "She wants to argue incompetence? This shows not only are you paying bills, you are preparing major transactions. Judges love that." Marissa tapped her pen against the desk. "But you have to keep this under wraps until the right moment. If she finds out too soon, she said he'll try to stall the sale." I nodded. She wants to find out. Not until I put the papers in the Judge Sepp's hand. That night, back home, I checked the locks again. Every tumbler clicked smooth. I ran my fingers over the brass keys like rosary beads. This house wasn't just walls, it was leverage, and until the sale closed, I had to guard it like a vault. On November 18th, Mark called with the first serious offer. $318,000. More than I expected. The buyer wanted to move quickly, before Christmas. Perfect. I sat at the table, the offer sheet glowing under the lamp. My pen scratched across the bottom, sealing the deal. Midnight came, and I slipped the signed contract into the same hymnal between the yellowed pages. My daughter had no clue her prize was already slipping away, and yet she thought she was tightening the net. On November 19th, she left brochures for nursing homes on my porch. Glossy pictures of smiling seniors playing bingo. My stomach turned. She wanted me boxed up, tucked away, while she counted the dollars from the sale she thought she'd orchestrate. I picked up the brochures, folded them, and slid them into my evidence folder. Not because I needed them, but because every move she made was proof of intent. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet shuffle of papers, the click of a new lock, the scratch of a signature on a contract she doesn't know exists. By the end of that week, my home was no longer hers to covet. It was mine to weaponize. And as the calendar crept toward December, I knew the real fight was coming. Because if she wanted to argue I couldn't manage my own affairs, I'd walk into that courtroom with more proof than she could ever spin. And when I dropped the sale contract on the judge's desk, she'd finally understand what incompetence really looked like. By November 20th, my quiet preparations were no longer enough. I needed more than receipts and signed contracts. I needed witnesses, people who could stand in court and say, "This man isn't Sepp broken. He's Sepp's being hunted by his own daughter." That morning, my neighbor Jim stopped by again. He'd overheard something through his thin living room walls the night before. "She was on the phone," he told me, shifting the toothpick in his mouth. "Said clear as day, the judge will sign it before Christmas." Dad wouldn't even know what hit him. I felt the blood rush to my face. "You Sept are sure?" "As sure as I'm standing here," he said. Then, without me asking, he offered to sign a sworn affidavit. Vietnam had hardened him, but betrayal like this cut deep, even for him. That afternoon, we went to Marissa's office. She typed up the affidavit while Jim dictated every word. The date, November 19th. The phrase, "Judge will sign it before Christmas." He signed, his hand steady as a rock. Notarized on the spot, sealed in blue ink. That piece of paper went straight into my growing arsenal. Every move my daughter made, she thought she was tightening the noose. Instead, she was weaving her own rope. On November 21st, I sat at my desk and began gathering more small proofs. Utility bills, gas, electric, water, each marked PA'd in black ink. Grocery slips with dates and amounts circled. Even a dry cleaning ticket from 2 weeks earlier, $18.75 for pressing my only suit. I slipped each into the Independence folder. They weren't just errands, they were testaments. But the biggest step came on November 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving. Mark called. "The buyers are ready to move forward. We will close December 12th if all goes smooth." I gripped the phone tight. December 12th, just 6 days before the court date. My timing couldn't have been more perfect if I'd written the script myself. That night, as I sat at the table signing the escrow documents, the house seemed to breathe around me. Every creak in the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the eaves felt like history passing into strategy. For years, this house had sheltered me. Now it would protect me in a different way. On November 25th, my daughter made her boldest move yet. She showed up at my door unannounced, voice sweet as honey. "Dad, can I come in?" I didn't set open the door. "Why are you here?" "I just want to talk," she said. "About your future." "My future Seps is fine," I shot back. Her tone hardened. "You Sept are making this harder than it needs to be. Once the judge signs, it's set up, it'll all be easier." I pressed the recorder button on my old flip phone, slipping it against the screen door. "Say that again?" She huffed. "You heard me." And with that, she stormed off, heels crunching against the frosted sidewalk. When I played the recording back later, her voice came through clear. Another nail in her coffin. On November 28th, I met Marissa again. I handed her the affidavit, the utility bills, the grocery slips, the dry cleaning ticket, and the recording. She stacked them neatly on her desk. "This," she said, tapping the pile, "is how you win." Alex grinned. She wanted to show you were incompetent. Instead, she just left a trail of her own greed. I left their office lighter than I'd felt in weeks. The collapse of early November was gone. What replaced it was methodical, sharp. My wife used to say I was at my best when I had a ledger to balance, and now I was balancing the cruelest ledger of my life. On December 1st, Mark called with confirmation the closing date was locked. December 12th, the buyer had wired escrow funds, $318,000. The exact slip showed the wire date, circled in blue pen. I tucked it into the folder, heart pounding. She thought she was circling me for the kill. She had no idea the ground was already crumbling beneath her. On December 3rd, I walked past the calendar in my kitchen. 2 red circles stared back at me. December 12th for closing, December 18th for court. My countdown wasn't to defeat. It was to deliverance. That Sunday, snow dusted the front lawn. My daughter didn't call, didn't text. Maybe she thought silence would scare me. Instead, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat at the table, and read through every piece of evidence. Bills, affidavits, recordings, all aligned, all airtight. I whispered to myself, "You think you Sepp built a cage, but I Sepp them the one holding the key." And when I slid the escrow confirmation into the hymnal beside the signed offer, I knew exactly how Act 7, the courtroom showdown, would play out. Because revenge isn't always about fury. Sometimes it's about patience. Sometimes it's about letting the other side believe they've won, right up until you drop the hammer. and with every document tucked neatly away, with every lock secure and every ally aligned, I was ready. December was coming, and so was justice. By December 5th, the city felt colder, heavier. Cleveland winters had a way of settling into your bones, but that year the chill came less from the wind and more from what I knew was coming. 2 red circles stared back at me from the kitchen calendar. December 12th, house closing. December 18th, court. Every day between them felt like a tightrope. On December 6th, I walked out to grab the mail and nearly tripped over a glossy stack left on my porch. Brochures for nursing homes. Bright pictures of seniors playing bingo, laughing at round tables, smiling as if their independence wasn't already stripped away. One cover even said, "Give your loved one peace of mind this holiday season." My hand trembled as I carried them inside. I flipped through each page, the cheerful faces blurring with rage. She wasn't even hiding her intentions anymore. She wanted me boxed up, labeled, filed away before Christmas. I folded the brochures neatly and slid them into my evidence folder. Proof of intent. That evening the phone rang. Her number lit the screen. I answered. "Dad, we need to talk," she said. Voice clipped. "I sutton listening," I replied. "I spoke to your doctor," she said. "He understands you supper not safe alone. You need supervision." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Supervision? I said, been paying bills, repairing roofs, cooking my own meals. You know that. She ignored me. "If you sep just cooperate, this could be easy. You sep be comfortable. You wouldn't just have to worry anymore." I let silence hang in the air, then whispered, "What I worry about is you." I clicked the recorder on my old flip phone. Her voice poured in like poison. "The judge will see reason, it's sep's already handled." I saved the file, labeling it with the date, December 6. By December 7th, the walls of my house felt closer. Snow pressed against the windows, and even the tick of the clock felt louder. Every creak in the floorboards made me check the locks. I kept the new brass keys in my pocket at all times, rubbing them like talismans. That night, Jim came over. "Saw her parked outside earlier," he said. "Didn't set get out, just sat there." "She seps circling," I muttered. "Like a shark," Jim replied. I nodded. But sharks don't net know when the hook esseps already set. On December 9th, I drove downtown to Marissa's office. I handed her the brochures, the new recording, and Jim's update. She slid them into the growing case file. "Frank, she sips overplaying her hand," Marissa said. "Judges done tut like manipulation. You just keep holding steady until the 18th. Alex leaned over the file. "And remember, on the 12th, once the sale closes, you sept got the ultimate trump card. She can sept claim incompetence if you sept just executed a 6-figure real estate deal." I nodded. "And she can sell what I no longer own." By December 10th, tension peaked. She called 3 times that day. I let the first 2 go to voicemail. The third I picked up. "Why are you ignoring me?" she snapped. "Why are you trying to erase me?" I shot back. She exhaled sharply. "You don't understand. The house is falling apart. You falling apart. I sep just protecting what sep's mine." "What sep's yours?" I barked. "This was mine and your mother sep's. You weren't sept even born when we signed the deed." Her voice dripped with contempt. "And now it's sep's mine by right." I recorded every word. By December 11th, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked with each rotation. My mind raced through the evidence. Receipts, affidavits, recordings, contracts. Everything lined up, but I knew she wouldn't stop until she was humiliated publicly. And that day was almost here. On December 12th, I drove to the title office downtown. My suit was pressed. The $18.75 ticket for dry cleaning still tucked in my wallet like a badge of proof. Mark met me at the office. The buyer was already seated, pen in hand. The closer slid the papers across the table. "Sign here, Mr. Peterson." I signed, stroke after stroke, the ink flowing steady. When I was done, I folded the closing statement and slipped it into my leather-bound evidence folder. The house was gone. Not hers. Not mine. But a weapon I now carried straight into the courtroom. When I walked out into the December air, snowflakes stinging my cheeks, I felt taller. The house no longer shackled me, it shielded me. But 6 days still stretched between me and the hearing. 6 days where she'd claw and scratch, trying to break me down before the judge could see the truth. And as I tucked the closing statement beside the affidavits and receipts, I whispered to myself, "Let her come." The rope sep's already around her neck. December 18th came like a drumbeat. 6 days after the house closed, 6 days after I'd signed away what my daughter thought was hers. Snow blanketed Cleveland, a hard frost crusting the courthouse steps as I climbed them with Marissa by my side. The air smelled of salt and exhaust, but inside me there was only fire. The courthouse lobby buzzed with holiday energy. Lawyers clutching red Starbucks cups, security guards wearing Santa pins. But for me it felt like walking into a battlefield. I adjusted the knot of my freshly pressed tie, the one from the $18.75 dry cleaning ticket, and gripped the leather folder under my arm. Inside it, affidavits, receipts, recordings. The house closing statement. My life, reduced to documents, but documents that could save me. Courtroom 4B smelled faintly of old wood and lemon polish. The judge, a gray-haired man named Holloway, adjusted his glasses as he glanced at the docket. My daughter sat across the aisle with her lawyer, lips pressed in a thin smile. She wouldn't look at me. Maybe she thought it was already over. "All rise," the bailiff barked. We stood, then sat. The judge leaned forward. "We are here for the matter of guardianship petition. Case number." His voice blurred in my ears. What mattered was the truth about to come out. Her lawyer started first. Slick, rehearsed. He painted me as fragile, declining, incapable of maintaining my affairs. He spoke of safety and best interests, but his words carried the stench of dollar signs. "Mr. Peterson Nestis' daughter has his health and welfare in mind," he concluded. "She seeks guardianship to ensure he is cared for." The judge nodded. "Does the petitioner wish to add anything?" My daughter stood, smoothing her skirt. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Your Honor, my father is not what he used to be. He forgets things. He misplaces bills. The house is crumbling. I am only trying to keep him safe." Her words were knives dipped in honey. She glanced at me then, a flicker of pity or maybe triumph in her eyes. Judge Holloway turned. "Mr. Peterson, you may respond." I rose slowly, folder in hand. My voice cracked at first, but steadied with each word. "Your Honor, my daughter says I am incompetent, that I cannot manage my affairs, that my home is falling apart. But I stand here with proof that none of that is true." I opened the folder and pulled out the first sheet. On November 15th, I paid my property taxes, $4,600, at the courthouse in person. Here is the receipt, stamped paid. I handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Then the roof bill. October 29th, I paid $2,800 for roof repairs. Signed, dated, receipt, right here. I arranged the contractor myself. Murmurs rippled through the room. I pulled more. Utility bills, gas, electric, water, all current, all paid by me. Grocery receipts, gas station slips, even a dry cleaning ticket, $18.75, for the very suit I am wearing today. I don't set forget. I don't set neglect. I live. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. My daughter's smile faltered. "And here," I said, voice rising, "is a sworn affidavit from my neighbor Jim. He overheard her say, quote, 'That of the judge will sign it before Christmas.' Dad won't even know what hit him." Gasps filled the room. Jim, seated behind me, gave a curt nod when the judge looked his way. I wasn't set finished. I pulled out the flip phone, pressed a button, and her voice echoed through the courtroom. "You scepter making this harder than it needs to be. Once the judge signs, its scepter'll all be easier." The recording crackled, damning and clear. My daughter's face drained of color. And then, the coup de grace. I reached into the folder and withdrew the closing statement. "Finally, Your Honor, on December 12th, just 6 days ago, I executed the sale of my home, $318,000. Fully closed, escrow cleared. Here is the signed statement." The bailiff delivered it to the bench. The judge's eyebrows shot up. "This house she claims is Sid falling apart, Sid that I couldn't possibly manage. I negotiated the listing, handled the paperwork, signed the closing, all without her knowledge. Does that sound like incompetence?" The room was silent, except for the scratching of the judge's pen as he flipped through the pages. My daughter finally broke. "He tricked me. she burst out, standing so quickly her chair screeched against the floor. He knew what I wanted, and he ruined it on purpose. The Judge Sepp's gavel cracked. Order. Her lawyer tugged her sleeve, but she shook him off. That house should have been mine. He wasn't have been supposed to. Enough. Judge Holloway Sepp's voice boomed. Sit down, Miss Peterson. She sank back into her chair, eyes blazing. But the damage was done. She'd revealed her true motive for all to hear. The judge leaned forward, eyes stern. Mr. Peterson, the evidence you presented demonstrates that you are not only competent, but more organized than most individuals half your age. The petition for guardianship is denied. The gavel came down again, final, echoing like a gunshot. Relief flooded me, but it wasn't triumph I felt. It was vindication. For weeks she had painted me as broken, fragile, ready to be discarded, and now the truth was carved into the record. I was still standing. My daughter's face twisted with rage and humiliation. She wouldn't look at me as the bailiff called the next case. I gathered my folder, every piece of evidence sliding neatly back inside. Jim clapped me on the shoulder. Marissa smiled faintly. As we walked out into the cold December air, the courthouse bells chimed noon. Snow fell in lazy spirals, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed easy. The battle was over, but the war of consequences had just begun. When the gavel fell and Judge Holloway denied her petition, I thought I'd feel triumphant. But walking out of that courtroom into the December cold, what I really felt was tired. Tired, but free. The courthouse bells chimed noon, their echo bouncing off the icy sidewalks. Snowflakes clung to my overcoat as Marissa tucked the folder back into my hands. It's over, she said softly. But it wasn't really over. Not yet. By the time I got home that afternoon, the phone was ringing off the hook. Family. Neighbors. Some congratulating me. Others asking what happened. Word travels fast in Cleveland, especially when scandal is involved. And nothing stirs gossip like a daughter trying to legally erase her own father. Jim stopped by first. He carried a casserole his wife had baked. Heard how it went, he said with a grin. Half the neighborhood already knows. She made a fool of herself. I set the dish on the counter and nodded. Her mask slipped. She settled stew in it, he said. Folks don't forget things like that. He was right. By evening my voicemail was full. My sister-in-law left a message. Frank, I can believe she did that in open court. People are talking. She ruined her own reputation. And yet, even as the whispers turned against her, she didn't back down. That night, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from her. Her voice cracked with anger. You ruined everything. That house should have been mine. You will regret this. I saved it. Another piece of proof, though I didn't need more. At this point, it wasn't about judges or evidence. It was about dignity. On December 20th, Mark called to confirm the final wire had cleared. After paying off the small remaining mortgage, $224,500 sat in my bank account. He emailed me the bank slip, which I printed and tucked into the evidence folder. Cold, hard numbers. Security she could never touch. That morning I walked through the now empty house one last time. Boxes stacked by the door, furniture sold off or given away. Every corner echoed. The rocking chair. The quilt. The brass keys that no longer matched the locks. I slid the last key across the counter and whispered, "Thank you." Then I walked out. By Christmas I'd moved into a modest apartment downtown. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, a view of the frozen river. Rent paid on time, utilities in my name, independence stamped into every slip of paper. Meanwhile, my daughter was spiraling. Mutual friends told me she'd stopped showing her face at church. A cousin said she'd tried explaining it all away, that she was only trying to protect me, that I was too stubborn to see it. But no one bought it anymore. They'd heard her outburst in the courtroom. They'd seen the mask crack. On December 22nd, Marissa called with an idea. "Frank, we should file a restraining order, just in case." I hesitated, but when I replayed that venomous voicemail, I agreed. The paperwork was filed that afternoon. The judge signed it without a blink. Christmas Eve came quiet. I sat in my new apartment, sipping coffee from an old chipped mug. Snow fell outside, muffling the city noise. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. No fear of her key in my door. No dread of papers waiting on the table. But peace has a weight of its own. I missed the house, missed the echoes of my wife's laughter in the den, missed the comfort of knowing my life's work stood solid behind me. Yet I also knew this: I hadn't lost. I had chosen to let go on my terms. That mattered. And as I sat there with the evidence folder tucked safely in my drawer, I realized something. My revenge hadn't been cruel. It had been clean, lawful, sharp as a scalpel. She wanted to strip me of dignity. Instead, she'd stripped herself of reputation, family trust, and the inheritance she assumed was guaranteed. Fallout isn't about explosions. Sometimes it's just silence. Cold shoulders. The absence of calls. The sound of doors closing, one by one, until the betrayer stands alone. And as December turned to January, that silence grew. December 22nd, the same day the restraining order came through, I sat in Marissa's office one final time. Snow pelted the window, muffling the city outside. She slid a stack of documents across the desk toward me. "This is your new will," she said. "Read it carefully. Once you sign, it becomes the record." I picked up the papers, my hands steady now. For weeks I'd been defending myself, proving competence, countering lies. But this was different. This was offense. This was justice written in ink. I flipped through each page. The house was gone, sold and secured. The money was mine, not hers. And in this new will, her name was absent. Instead, modest sums were allocated to my church, to a veterans relief fund, and to a scholarship in my wife's name. The rest, enough for me to live comfortably, remained under my control until the end of my days. Marissa leaned back in her chair. "Once this is filed and notarized, there's septis nothing she can claim. You septa cut off her leverage." I signed my name slowly, deliberately, every stroke of the pen a line drawn in stone. The notary stamped the seal, the sound of the embosser echoing like a gavel. Done. Justice isn't always about winning battles in court. Sometimes it's about rewriting the future. When I left the office, the snow had stopped. The city lights glowed on the wet pavement, reflecting in long golden streaks. I walked with the will tucked under my arm, feeling taller than I had in years. That evening I called Jim. "It's finished," I told him. "You cut her out?" "I had to," I said. "She tried to bury me alive. Now she gets nothing." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Frank, that sips justice." A day later, on December 23rd, I sat in my apartment sorting through my folders. The guardianship petition, the affidavits, the receipts, all neatly filed. I labeled the box, Evidence 2023, and slid it onto the closet shelf. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it was history. My history. Proof that when tested, I didn't fold. On Christmas Day, the phone rang once. Her number. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat by the window, watching snow drift across the river. Children laughed outside, their voices carrying over the still air. I thought about my wife, about the promises I'd kept, and the battles I'd fought. I whispered aloud, as if she could hear me. "It's Sep's over. She can Sept hurt me anymore." That night, I made one final entry in my leather-bound diary, December 25th. Justice secured. She lost not because I destroyed her, but because she revealed herself. And for once, I closed the book without dread. Sweet revenge stories always circle back to one truth. Betrayal has a cost, and my daughter had paid it. She hadn't just lost her case in court, she'd lost her inheritance, her reputation, and the trust of the very family she thought would back her. Meanwhile, I hadn't gained riches or fame. I hadn't become younger or stronger. What I had gained was dignity. The kind of dignity no judge could grant and no daughter could steal. Before I turned in that night, I looked into the mirror. The man staring back wasn't broken. He wasn't unsafe. He was seasoned, scarred, but still standing. And that was justice enough. Christmas Eve in Cleveland has always been quiet, but that year it felt like silence itself had weight. My apartment overlooked the frozen river, and snowflakes drifted past the glass like ash. I sat in my chair with a chipped mug of coffee. No decorations, no tree. Just me and the sound of the old clock ticking against the wall. I thought back to the night it all began. October 29th, the guardianship papers lying open on my kitchen table. My hands shaking as I read her name in the petitioner's box. The humiliation, the disbelief, the collapse that followed. It felt like a lifetime ago. And yet, in less than 2 months, everything had changed. The house I thought I'd die in? Gone. Sold on my terms, not hers. The $318,000 sale had become $224,500 safely deposited in my account after paying off the last small mortgage. Clean, final. My independence no longer tied to bricks and shingles, but secured in numbers no one else could touch. The daughter I thought would protect me in my old age? Exposed. Her mask had cracked in public. The courtroom still echoed in my memory, the way her voice had risen shrill as she screamed about the house being hers. She hadn't realized that in those few seconds she'd told the judge everything he needed to know. And me? The man she called incompetent? I was still here, still paying bills, still carrying my own keys. Stronger in some ways than I'd been in years. Reflection has a way of showing you the difference between what you've lost and what you've gained. Yes, I lost my house. I lost the illusion that my daughter cared more about me than money. But I gained something rarer: clarity. Clarity that sometimes blood isn't thicker than water. Clarity that trust, once broken, doesn't have to define you, it can free you. I remembered my wife Sipsa's voice, soft in the hospital bed, all those years ago. Promise me you sit'll stay strong for her. She sit'll need you. I'd kept that promise, maybe longer than I should have. I had stayed strong, overlooked her flaws, given her the benefit of doubt, even when the signs were clear. But sometimes what someone needs isn't your protection, it's the mirror of their own actions. On Christmas morning, I walked outside into the fresh snow. The city was quiet, the river still. I pulled my coat tighter and whispered into the cold air. You didn't lose me, you gave me away. Because that's the truth. I hadn't walked out of her life. She'd pushed me. She'd chosen greed over family, control over love, and in the end she lost the very thing she claimed to be protecting. I didn't feel hatred anymore. I didn't feel rage, just a kind of sad acceptance. She had shown me who she was, and I had finally believed her. Justice, I realized, isn't about punishment. It's about boundaries, drawing a line so clear that no one can cross it again. That winter, as the snow piled up against my window, I learned to live smaller but freer. No sprawling house, no memories at every turn, just a modest apartment, my own name on every bill, and a folder of evidence that reminded me I had fought and I had won. People sometimes think revenge is fire and fury, shouting matches and slammed doors. But real revenge, it's quieter. It's watching your betrayer sink under the weight of their own choices while you walk away lighter. And as the clock ticked into the new year, I knew this. I hadn't just saved myself from her scheme. I'd saved myself from spending my final years tied to someone who saw me as an asset, not a father. Reflection doesn't erase the wound, but it makes the scar something you can live with. And mine would always remind me that when the time came, I didn't fold. I didn't surrender. I stood, fought, and walked out whole. January settled over Cleveland like a heavy blanket of ice. The holidays were behind us, the court battle over, and the apartment was slowly becoming more than just four walls. It was becoming mine. On January 5th, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went grocery shopping without rushing, pushed the cart down every aisle, ticking off my own list. Bread, milk, coffee, a carton of eggs. At the register, the total came to $22.49. I folded the receipt, slipped it into my folder, and later taped it to the refrigerator. Not because I needed to, but because it reminded me I was still capable, still living on my own terms. The apartment was modest. One bedroom, a small living room, a narrow balcony that overlooked the river when the fog lifted. On the wall hung only one picture, my wife, smiling, her hand resting on my shoulder the summer before she passed. I kept it there as a compass, a reminder of who I was fighting to remain. Neighbors began to notice me. An older couple across the hall invited me in for coffee one morning. They'd heard bits of the story, word had traveled even downtown, but they didn't press. We just talked about the weather, the ice on the sidewalks, the price of heating, simple things. And in that simplicity I found comfort. My daughter, meanwhile, stayed silent. No calls, no texts. The restraining order kept her at bay, but even without it, I think pride and shame would have done the job. Through the grapevine, I heard she'd been avoiding family gatherings, dodging questions at church. People whispered, and every whisper carried the same message: she'd gone too far. On January 12th, I met Mark for lunch. He slid a small envelope across the table. Final statement from the sale. Everything squared. Inside was the printed confirmation of the escrow disbursement. Numbers neat and final, $224,500. He raised his glass of iced tea. To closure, he said. I clinked mine against his. To closure. Even Marissa called once, just to check in. How's life treating you, Frank? She asked. Quiet, I told her, and that sip's exactly how I like it. Life became about the little things. Reading the morning paper over black coffee, taking evening walks along the frozen river, watching the light from the bridges shimmer on the ice, cooking simple meals, eggs, pasta, stew, and eating them alone without bitterness. Independence doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the silence of a clean apartment, in bills paid on time, in the steady hum of a heater you control yourself. But there was still irony in the quiet. She had tried to secure her future by erasing me, and in the end she'd erased herself from mine. No inheritance, no house, no trust, nothing. On January 20th, I attended church for the first time since the ordeal. People shook my hand, clapped my back, whispered, "Glad you stood tall." The sermon was about forgiveness, about letting go of bitterness. I sat there listening, wondering if I'd ever be able to forgive. Maybe someday, but not yet. That night, I wrote in my diary, January 20th. I am not broken. I am not buried. I am alive, and I am free. The aftermath of betrayal isn't glamorous. There are no parades, no applause, just quiet mornings, clean receipts, and the knowledge that you survived what was meant to end you. And in that quiet, I found something worth more than the house, worth more than the inheritance she wanted to steal. Peace. By spring, the ice on the river began to crack and drift. Cleveland thawed slowly, sidewalks wet with meltwater, bare branches stretching toward weak sunlight. I'd settled into a rhythm, coffee at dawn, a walk by the river, bills paid neatly on the first of every month. Life was smaller but lighter. Then, on May 14th, irony knocked on my door. I was coming home from the market. Paper bag tucked under my arm, a loaf of rye bread and some apples inside, when I saw a yellow notice plastered to the apartment door across the hall. Foreclosure. The date printed in bold, May 14th, 2024. I froze. The name on the notice wasn't my neighbor's, it was hers, my daughter. She'd taken a lease in the same complex, just 3 floors down, probably thinking she'd show me she could manage on her own. But her debts had piled up faster than she could juggle them. Credit cards, car loans, maybe even gambling. I didn't know. All I knew was that she was sinking. I stood there for a long time, staring at that notice. Bright yellow, taped crooked. The ink already smudged from rain. It hit me then. She'd tried to strip me of everything in the name of security, and in the end she had none. That night I sat by my window, diary open, and wrote, the house was supposed to save her. Instead it saved me. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread again. Neighbors mentioned seeing movers hauling her furniture out. Someone said they'd spotted her arguing with the landlord in the parking lot. Her face red with rage. I never saw her, I didn't go looking. Because revenge isn't chasing someone down to watch them fall. It's standing tall while their own choices drag them under. I remembered the courtroom, her voice rising as she shouted, "That house should have been mine." I wondered if she thought about those words as the foreclosure tape peeled off her own door. On June 1st, I sat at my desk with a fresh bank statement, $224,500, still resting safely in my account. Every cent accounted for. I underlined the balance, closed the envelope, and slid it into my folder. Proof that competence isn't age, it's choice. It's choice. Neighbors often ask me if I regret selling the house. If I miss it. The answer is complicated. Yes, I miss the memories. I miss the quilt folded on the sofa, the brass keys polished by decades of use. But regret? No. Because selling that house turned her weapon into my shield. The final irony is this: she tried to bury me alive in paperwork, but it was paperwork, receipts, affidavits, contracts that buried her instead. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. In the quiet of a notarized will, in the hum of a paid utility bill, in the silence of an empty voicemail box. And sometimes justice simply looks like this: me, alive and free, sipping coffee on a quiet morning, while she faces the ruins of her own making. I closed my diary on May 20th with one final line. Sometimes revenge is just living long enough to see the truth. And that truth was simple. I hadn't lost her. She had lost me.